Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 18. Jesus also said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who was informed of accusations that his manager was wasting his assets. So he called the manager in and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Turn in the account of your administration, because you can no longer be my manager.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What should I do, since my master is taking my position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. I know what to do, so when I'm put out of management, people will welcome me into their homes.' So he contacted his master's debtors, one by one. He asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' The man replied, 100 measures of olive oil. The manager said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' The second man replied, 100 measures of wheat. The manager said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their contemporaries than the people of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by how you use worldly wealth, so that when it runs out you will be welcomed into the eternal homes. The one who is faithful in very little, is also faithful in much, and the one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you haven't been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you haven't been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." The Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and ridiculed him. But Jesus said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in men's eyes, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly prized among men is utterly detestable in God's sight. The law and the prophets were in force until John. Since then, the good news of the kingdom of God has been proclaimed, and everyone is urged to enter it. But it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tiny stroke of a letter in the law to become void. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery, and the one who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery." Yeah, so you have here this story of the unrighteous steward who, in the process of getting fired by his employer, makes himself more appealing towards his manager's towards his employer's clientele by slashing the debt that they owe his employer. Yeah, and then you have him being ridiculed, essentially, by the Pharisees here. He said to his disciples, this seems to be a different occasion than the previous chapter. Here, Jesus taught his disciples, not the multitude mentioned in Luke 15, 1 through 2. However, as Jesus taught his disciples, a group of Pharisees also listened. There was a certain rich man who had a steward. A steward was a manager, especially a manager of money or property. In the story, Jesus told the steward's boss, the steward's boss, the rich man, heard that his steward had cheated him, that is, wasting his goods, and he called him to account. The steward had followed a career of embezzlement from Barclay. "Give an account of your stewardship," are words that everyone will hear, both sinner and saint. All will have to give account in some way, and we will give account to God. Spurgeon once noted that each of us will have to give account of our stewardship regarding our time, our talents, our substance, and our influence. For each of us, our stewardship will one day come to an end. The preacher's voice, mental faculties, and strength will not last forever. The wealth of this world may not last even this life. A mother's stewardship over her children changes and diminishes greatly. If Jesus does not come first, we all will die and pass from this life to the next. "What shall I do, for my master is taking the stewardship away from me?" When the steward knew that he would be called to account, he knew his poor management would be exposed. He also knew that other options were unattractive to him. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him. So the steward made friends with his master's debtors by selling their accounts for less than they actually owed. Therefore the steward, knowing he would be called to account, used his present position to prepare him for the next stage of his life. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. While not approving of his conduct, the master did in fact approve the steward's shrewdness. Jesus added the thought that the businessmen of his day, sons of this world, were more wise, bold, and forward-thinking in the management of what they had than the people of God were with managing what they had. Some consider this to be one of Jesus' most difficult parables, because it seems that Jesus used an obviously dishonest man as an example for his disciples. Yet God sometimes uses evil things that are familiar to us to illustrate a particular point, without praising the thing itself. Other examples of this principle are when Paul used things like war and slavery as illustrations of the Christian life. Yet the dishonest steward was a good example on several points. First, he knew he would be called to account for his life, and he took that seriously. Christians should take seriously the idea that they will be called to account, and that idea can be a joy if we are properly about our master's business. Second, he took advantage of his present position to arrange a comfortable future. Jesus' assessment is still true. The sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. If we pursued the kingdom of God with the same vigor and zeal that the children of this world pursue profits and pleasure, we would live in an entirely different world. It could be said that it is to the shame of the church that Coca-Cola is more widely distributed than the gospel of Jesus Christ. Simply, it is because the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. From McLaren, "Go to the man of the world, thou Christian, and do not let it be said that the devil's scholars are more studious and earnest than Christ's disciples." Make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. Jesus transferred the principle of the parable, reminding us that we need to use our present resources to plan ahead for eternity. The word mammon is from the Aramaic word mammon, which originally meant that in which one puts one's trust, hence wealth. Jesus called it unrighteous mammon because riches promise much and perform nothing. They excite hope and confidence and deceive both. In making a man depend on them for happiness, they rob him of the salvation of God and of eternal glory. From Clark. That when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. The world is filled with financial planners and advisors, and it is good for Christians to learn how to use their money wisely. But when most Christians talk about wise money management, they forget to practice the most important kind of long-term investing, investing with an eye to eternity, an everlasting home. In a survey taken long ago, in 1992, people were asked how much money they would have to make to have the American dream. Those who earned $25,000 or less a year thought they would need around $54,000. Those in the $100,000 annual income bracket said that they could buy the dream for an average of $192,000 a year. These figures indicate that we typically think we must double our income in order to find the good life, instead of finding it now. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. In these words of Jesus, money is considered to be one of the least things. Therefore, if a person cannot be faithful in managing the things that are least, they should not be trusted to be faithful in handling the things that are much. If you have not been faithful, if one is false and unfaithful in everyday life, it doesn't matter if they know how to project a Christian image. They are also false and unfaithful in the spiritual life, and no one should entrust them with true riches. How we act in regarding small things oftentimes transfers to how we're going to act concerning bigger matters. If you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust, the true riches? In this sense, those who are leaders among God's people must be good managers of their own money. If a person can't be faithful before God with the money he gives, how can they be faithful with the care of people? This certainly does not mean that leaders in the church have to be wealthy or make a lot of money. It is an issue of how they manage the resources God has given to them, not how great their resources are. Unfortunately, when it comes to the question, who will commit to your trust the true riches, far too many Christians are willing to entrust their spiritual care to a person who can't even care for the things of unrighteous mammon. No servant can serve two masters. Having two masters is not like working two jobs. Jesus has the master and slave relationship in view. A slave can't belong to two masters at the same time. Jesus states that serving two masters is a simple impossibility. If you think that you are successful serving two masters, you are deceived. One can have both money and God, but one cannot serve both money and God. Certainly Jesus spoke about the heart here. Many people would say they love God, but their service of money shows in fact that they do not. How can we tell who or what we serve? One way is by this principle. You will sacrifice for your God. If you will sacrifice for the sake of money, but will not sacrifice for the sake of Jesus, don't deceive yourself. Money is your God. Okay, yeah, you will sacrifice for your God. If you will sacrifice for the sake of money, but will not sacrifice for the sake of Jesus, don't deceive yourself. Money is your God. Yeah. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If we, I think if we don't value the things of God, then that also shows where our master is. On a Friday afternoon in 1990, a businessman staggered to the steps of his Los Angeles office. Before he died of the gunshot wound to his chest, he called out the names of his 3 children, but he still had his $10,000 Rolex watch clutched in his hand. He was the victim of a rash of Rolex robberies and was killed as a sacrifice to his God. A 1992 story in the Los Angeles Times told about Michelle, a successful writer and editor who fears the day her husband might discover her secret stash of credit cards, her secret post office box, or the other tricks she used to hide how much money she spends shopping for herself. I make as much money as my husband. If I want a $500 suit from Ann Taylor, I deserve it and don't want to be hassled about it. So the easiest thing to do is lie. She explains. Last year, when her husband forced her to destroy one of her credit cards, Michelle went out and got a new one without telling him. I do live in fear. If he discovers this new Visa, he'll kill me. Wow. A school teacher explained more. Men just don't understand that shopping is our drug of choice, she joked, even while admitting that some months her salary goes exclusively to paying the minimum balance on her credit cards. Walking through the door of South Coast Plaza is like walking through the gates of heaven. God made car trunks for women to hide shopping bags in. A young professional named Mary explained, shopping is my recreation. It's my way of pampering myself. When you walk into a mall and you see all the stores, it's like something takes over and you get caught up in it. You cannot serve God and mammon. Some think that just because they are not rich, they are not a slave to money. But you don't have to be rich to serve mammon. The poor have just as much potential for greed and covetousness as the rich have. When God is served, mammon is used beneficently. When mammon is served, the claims of God are ignored. From Morgan. The worldling's wisdom is the ostrich's wings, to make him outrun others upon earth and in earthly things, but helps him never a whit toward heaven. From Trapp. Money possessing a man is the direst curse, for it hardens his heart and paralyzes his noblest powers. The money of a God-possessed man is a blessing, for it becomes the means of his expressing his sympathy with his fellows. From Morgan. Yeah. And ultimately, On the day we die, what does it all profit you anyway? More important to serve God with wealth. And the Pharisees derided him. The derision of the Pharisees was based on their own self-interest. They were lovers of money. Often we reject the message of Jesus because it hits too close to home. The word literally means that they turned up their noses at him, from Barclay. You are the ones who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. It is one thing to justify yourselves before men, because smooth words and a loving smile can deceive men. But God knows your hearts. When you serve another master, it is impossible to be justified before God, no matter what men think. For some people, the idea God knows your hearts is comfort. For others, it is a curse. For what is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. God judges our hearts with a different set of values. Men may honor someone because of their wealth or their public display of spirituality, but God sees who they really are. The law and the prophets were until John. Since that time, the kingdom of God has been preached. Jesus indicates that the ministry of John the Baptist marked the end of one great aspect of God's work. Since that time, the time ending with John's ministry, the good news of a new covenant is presented with an order that is different than the law, yet it fulfills the law. The kingdom of God has been preached and everyone is pressing into it. In Jesus' day, there were hundreds of revolutionaries willing to use violence to bring in the kingdom of God. While we do not imitate their violence, we do imitate their dedication, their willingness to sacrifice, and their passion to see the Messiah reign. In a sense, we are also at war. Pate suggested that pressing into it does not describe the appropriate effort and zeal necessary to pursue the kingdom of God. Instead, he thought it described the attempt of demonic powers and their human agents to forcefully enter and disrupt or destroy the work of God's kingdom, describing opposition to the work of Jesus. Certainly, in a sense, both are true. It is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for one tittle of the law to fail. As Jesus spoke of a new aspect of God's work beginning after the ministry of John the Baptist, he didn't want any to think that the new aspect of God's work ignored or neglected the law. Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. For example, the law concerning marriage is still binding. No matter how some rabbis try to explain it away, some rabbis taught that if a woman burned her husband's breakfast, it was grounds for divorce. Others considered finding a prettier woman was an acceptable reason to divorce. Jesus here taught the ideal regarding marriage and divorce, and it is dangerous for us to establish doctrine on isolated statements of Jesus without taking into account the whole counsel of his teaching. Since Jesus also taught that sexual immorality was acceptable grounds for divorce, and later the Apostle Paul added that desertion by an unbelieving spouse was also an acceptable reason, because of those two clear allowances, we must regard Jesus' command here to refer to the one who divorces his wife without biblical cause and marries another, that this one commits adultery. Again, Jesus emphasized the point. Under the new covenant, since the ministry of John the Baptist, God still cares about his law and our obedience. Anyhow, carrying on here, Psalm chapter 82, verses 1 through 8. God stands in the assembly of El. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. He says, "How long will you make unjust legal decisions and show favoritism to the wicked? Defend the cause of the poor and the fatherless. Vindicate the oppressed and suffering. Rescue the poor and needy. Deliver them from the power of the wicked. They neither know nor understand. They stumble around in the dark, while all the foundations of the earth crumble. I thought, you are gods, all of you are sons of the Most High, yet you will die like mortals. You will fall like all the other rulers. Rise up, O God, and execute judgment on the earth, for you own all the nations." Yeah. So, Jesus brings up this psalm in particular when he's talking, I think it was with the Pharisees, and they accuse him of blasphemy, saying, "You claim to be God." Essentially, that's blasphemy. But Jesus makes a case from arguing from the lesser to the greater, in that in this psalm, rulers of men are called gods, since they are called such, and especially since Jesus is such, it doesn't make sense that he should be accused of blasphemy. God judges among the gods. God standing in the midst of these mighty ones is to bring judgment among them. The word gods here is Elohim, the plural for the generic word for God in Hebrew. The idea of God judging gods has led to several suggestions regarding the identity of these Elohim, these gods. Elohim is often used to describe the true God, Yahweh. It is in the plural to describe both the majesty of his person and to be a hint of the triune nature of God, being one God in three persons. Elohim is sometimes used as the plural of pagan deities, the false gods of the nations. Elohim is sometimes used in reference to angelic beings. Elohim is here best taken as a reference to human judges, who stand in the place of God in their ability to determine the fate of others. Gathered around him is an assembly of judges who are called Elohim because they are his delegates. They administer his will. They are his executive agents. Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day as well. And that's ultimately, we respect earthly governments because they're acting on behalf of God. They get their power and authority from God. For instance, if you have a police officer who's not obeying the law, that is, he's outside of this chain of authority, then he doesn't have to be listened to. Yeah, and he's only right in being listened to in as far as he is enforcing the law. The judges and magistrates are compared in this psalm to God because they exercise something of his power in the right ordering of human society. Martin Luther pointed out that Psalm 82, 1 and 6 both establishes and limits the authority of princes. It establishes it because it is God who appoints the authorities. It is he who calls them gods. It limits their authority because they are accountable to him, as the psalm shows. Earthly judiciaries are the appointment of God. All magistrates act in his name and by virtue of his commission. He is invisibly present at their assemblies and superintends their proceedings. He receives appeals from their wrongful decisions. He will one day rehear all cases at his own tribunal and reverse every iniquitous sentence before the great congregation of men and angels. How long will you judge unjustly? As God calls together this assembly of judges, he did not do it to compliment them or pay them honor. He did it to confront them for judging unjustly and for showing partiality to the wicked. This confrontation shows that God himself is the judge at the ultimate supreme court. God commands the unjust judges to defend the poor and fatherless. God's instruction to the judges of this earth is to do their duty in defending those who are often treated unjustly. In Asaph's day, the poor and the fatherless were often the targets of unfair treatment. It was the job of the judges to defend them and do justice to the afflicted and needy. Free them from the hand of the wicked. One characteristic of the wicked is that they prey upon the poor and needy. It was the divinely directed duty of judges to free the vulnerable from those who oppress them. King Jehoshaphat of Judah gave similar wise instructions to judges in 2 Chronicles 19, 6 and 7, and said to the judges, "Take heed to what you are doing, for you do not judge for man, but for the Lord, who is with you in the judgment. Now therefore, let me Let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Take care and do it, for there is no iniquity with the Lord our God, no partiality, no taking of bribes. They do not know, nor do they understand. This should best be understood as a reference to the unjust judges themselves. Despite their high standing and higher opinion of themselves, they are often ignorant and easily overestimate their own understanding. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. When judges walk in the darkness of their arrogant pride, the lives of everyday people are uncertain and unstable, as if the ground that should be firm under their feet is shaking. You are gods. These human judges stood in the place of the gods above other people. They had the opportunity and the authority to change people's lives with a word, or sometimes even to end a life. In John 10:34-39, Jesus quoted verse 6 in a debate with religious leaders when they accused him of claiming to be God in a sinful, wrong way. Jesus reasoned if God gave these unjust judges the title gods, because of their office, why do you consider it blasphemy that I call myself the Son of God in light of the testimony of me and my works? Yeah. And all of you are children of the Most High. In still speaking to Israel's earthly judges, God reminded them that they, and all of humanity, are children of the Most High. This is true in the sense that every human being is made in the image of God and can be thought of as the offspring of God. Despite that, you shall die like men. The unjust judges of Israel needed to remember that others were greater than the judges thought, and they themselves were less than they thought. They were like gods only in a symbolic sense. They themselves would die like men and face judgment before the judge of all the earth. Yeah. They are like that manager, essentially, in the Luke 16 passage that we read. They have a commission, a job to do, like all of us, and they can either execute that job well or poorly. But one day, they, like everyone else, will be called to account. Arise, O God, judge the earth. Asaph closed the psalm with a plea to God to take his place as the ultimate judge. The unjust judges of Israel had their own area of authority, but God's authority is over all the earth. And finally, Proverbs 13, verses 2 and 3. From the fruit of his speech, a person eats good things, but the faithless desire the fruit of violence. The one who guards his words guards his life, but whoever is talkative will come to ruin. Yeah, we need to be careful in what we say. The tongue can be a source of good things, that is, from the fruit of his speech, a person eats good things. But it can also be a source of death. That is, whoever is talkative will come to ruin. There's a similar proverb that says, in the excess of words, iniquity is impossible to avoid, or something to that effect. Yeah. Let your words be few. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.